Today I'm speaking with Abdulhaq. If you have been following Propaganda & Co., you've definitely seen our interviews with him in the past. We've done a podcast with him. He's a journalist, he's an expert, he's a father, and he's the co-founder of Quds News Network. Raja, I wanted to speak to you today about your reaction to this recent escalation between Israel and Iran. Obviously, we're aware that Israel attacked them a week ago, but just this past weekend, Trump bombed the Fordo nuclear site. And so I wanted to get your views on this escalation broadly, and then we'll jump into some specifics.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, and it's good to be here, especially in these difficult times. After, as you mentioned, in the past couple of days, there has been a huge amount of escalations happening, specifically or starting with what you mentioned with the attack on the nuclear sites in Iran, specifically Fordo. One thing I want to highlight, I want to start a conversation with is the report that came about on ABC News in less than 24 hours after the attack itself, um, mentioning that this attack was exercised by the Biden administration and Israel last year. Clearly, this attack on Iran is not something that was planned last week. It was not something, as the media likes to claim, that Netanyahu was disagreeing with Trump and he eventually dragged him and convinced him and fooled him and all of that nonsense. I think it's obvious at this point, specifically almost 2 years after the genocide in Gaza, that most of this interpersonal relationship drama that we are seeing on social media and some media outlets are part of the distraction and part of deception. I think, the reason why I mentioned this context is I think it's important to realize that after October 7, and I know Ahmed, you covered this significantly before and talked about it in details. But after October 7, the map for the region has changed. The political arena, the rules of the games, the rules of engagement have all changed. And unfortunately, Israel and the U.S. have updated and upgraded their policies, but the region is still stuck in the rules of engagement prior to October 7. And that's one of the reasons why, unfortunately, Hezbollah was decapitated. And this is one of the reasons why Iranian military leadership were decapitated as well, because they're still functioning, unfortunately, through or using the rules of engagement prior to October 7. I think it's obvious at this point that after October 7, the US and Israel have adopted a new mechanism and a new strategy to annihilate and eliminate the resistance, starting with Gaza all the way to Lebanon and now in Iran, using or taking down the resistance and the supporters and the factions and the movements, and now the state Iran, piece by piece, by numbing the sponsors and the supporters of the resistance slowly. And I want to give an example of what happened last year before True Promise One operation was when Israel attacked the Iranian embassy in Syria. The first diplomatic and the first response from America, and we've been seeing this since October 7th until now, that anytime Israel does something crazy, the US comes right away and tries to play the diplomatic game. It was reported significantly in many media outlets that the U.S. went to Iran and told them that maybe you should hold the retaliation because we are so close to getting the deal done, the ceasefire discussion and the deal done between Hamas and Israel. And if you attack Israel today, then you might be undermining those discussions, putting Gaza at risk, and making Iran feel guilty that if they retaliate against the attack on their embassy, that they will be guilty for the genocide to continue in Gaza. And since then, almost every single time Israel does attack, anytime Israel attacks any party, specifically Iran, American diplomacy and European diplomacy will come right away and try to absorb the pressure, absorb the attack, and stops Iran from retaliating. And this strategy and this policy has been the driving force into taking down the resistance piece by piece by isolating. And we've seen this with Hezbollah as well last year, right before they assassinated Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. I'm sure Ahmed, you talked about this as well. Was the Americans and the French were trying to have a so-called ceasefire agreement between Lebanon and Israel, and that kind of busied Hezbollah for a little bit until Israel went on and assassinated Hassan Nasrallah. So it's obviously at this point that the U.S. and Israel are trying to take down the resistance in the region piece by piece, and unfortunately, almost the majority of the resistance axis have failed or have fell into the trap of American diplomacy, trying to sell the idea of ceasefire discussions, selling the ideas of de-escalation by stopping them from responding to Israel. And this is where we are today. This is another round, as we have all witnessed, not just the escalation and attack on the nuclear basis, but also Trump coming again and saying that, and also the media outlet, the media reports that are still coming out until today, based on Israeli officials saying that we would like to end the war this week. The idea is that, in their perspective, telling Iran take the attack on these nuclear sites as symbolic attack, since you already removed all of the enriched uranium away from these nuclear sites. So just take it as a symbolic attack. Let us have this win, and then we can end this war. But we all know this is another attempt to succumb Iran to this pressure and to stop them and sabotage their retaliation, so Israel and the US can prepare for the next step. So this is the cycle that we on today, and it's obvious at this point that there's no going back to the US. There's no going back to Israel, and Iran definitely, hopefully, they now understand and realize that there's no going back. There is no diplomatic discussions anymore.
Yeah, there's been enough reason to realize that there is no going back. You're right to point out, and you called this out very early on. I remember you were one of the first on X to kind of raise awareness about this good cop, bad cop strategy, and just weaponizing diplomacy, not just to hinder the actions of the resistance or Iran over the last year and 2 years since October 7th, but also domestically to stave off the protesters who were resisting at the DNC and things like that. And so they were affecting the Palestine movement and the anti-genocide movement in America as well. And so they've been weaponizing this and they've been getting away with it. And to me, it sounds like this is either like a US deep state strategy that is carrying over from Biden to Trump, because people think this is like a Trump and Witkoff scheme. It's really not. It's just a continuation of the Biden policy, as you've pointed out, or it's a Zionist policy that's been carried over, or a mixture of the both. But the point is, they've been doing this, and you're correct to point that out. Now, you mentioned something earlier. You said that the resistance and Iran keep playing by the previous rules of engagement. Why do you think that is? Is it because they're just fighting from a weaker position and they can't afford escalation into a new set of rules? Or is this coming from like a moral point of view? What is this about?
Yeah, so 2 points. Number one, just to tackle the first question or the first thing you mentioned. Um, I mean, to think that this is just a Trump and Mark Rubio strategy is really naive. As you mentioned, I called this off. Even the first day Israel attacked Iran, I called it off and I said, this is a U.S. attack executed by its client state, Israel, and the U.S. will step in when the time comes. Or when it's needed. The idea, and again, I want to go back to the ABC reporting on this issue, the issue that this was exercised with the Biden administration last year. And this is early last year. It was not even before, I don't remember exact details or exact dates, but I'm assuming it's before the True Promise one. So clearly the plan to annihilate and eliminate Iran's regime and to commit to a regime change in Iran is something that has been discussed since the 90s, or as a matter of fact, since the beginning of the Islamic Revolution in 1979. So it's not a secret. We all know that the Shah, Iran's Shah, or Shah's Iran, used to be the police of the U.S. empire in the region, in collaboration with Israel and Saudi Arabia. So this is some to them it was a big loss that they lost Iran, and they would like to bring it back. They would like to have Iran do the policing in the region alongside Israel. Um, but we can talk about this another time. But to go back to the point, and this is essential, as you mentioned, when we say the deep state in the terms of this strategy and this protocol, if you really take a look at the strategy of Witkoff or Blinken last year when Biden was the president, you see the same exact strategies. They go to Hamas and say, "Give us this one thing, and we promise you there will be change. The ceasefire agreement is right around the corner. Just give us this concession." And we've seen this in the release of the Israeli soldier with the American passport earlier this year. That Hamas was unfortunately fooled, right? Witkoff and did the same thing that Blinken did last year, which is give us concessions and diplomacy is around the corner, keep absorbing the pressure. And you're absolutely right in the sense of like how Blinken and the Biden administration last year, famously AOC and the whole Democrats saying, "Oh, Biden is working towards a ceasefire." All year long, we heard them talking about this because the concept and the idea was to absorb the pressure internally and externally to allow and buy Israel more time to eliminate Gaza, to continue ethnic cleansing, but most importantly, and I think I want to bring in another conversation. Last year, we used to say, because we did not foresee the future. Last year, we used to say that Israel or the US is buying Israel time to continue the elimination program and project in Gaza. But today, I am actually realizing that the buying of the time was not just to continue the genocide in Gaza, but to prepare for this moment today, to actually regime change in Iran. So the more I think about it, it's not reasonable that Israel needed all that time to truly, ethnic cleanse and genocide and commit genocide on Gaza. I mean, the US have given them so many green lights, so many opportunities or blank checks to do whatever they want in Gaza, and clearly the world doesn't care. So there might be something else beyond just continuing the genocide and making life impossible for the people of Gaza. And I think today we have the answer. The answer is yes, they want to continue the genocide, but also they would like or wanted to buy time to fool Iran and fool the region, thinking that this is all about Gaza. But today we're realizing that it's not just about Gaza. Today they're going back to what they said the head of the resistance, according to them, the head of the resistance groups in the region. So clearly, this is a deep state or this is an American institutions, and we have to realize. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to understand that America doesn't function as a state that is run by the president. Yes, the president has a lot of power, has a lot of authority, but this is a state that has the Pentagon and has think tanks that spend billions of dollars every single year to come up with strategies and policies and in terms of how to maintain their influence in the region. And again, that report of ABC is key into realizing that this exercise and this attack was planned and exercised last year. And I want to remind people too that the idea of absorbing pressure and dissent in the US is something that is historic. We've seen this during the Second World War, the attacks on Japan, the Vietnam War, the support for apartheid in South Africa, all the way to today, that there was always a crackdown on dissent. But even in American democracy and Western democracy in general, and I don't want to get too much into the political theory here, but democracy itself was developed in the West, right? As we know it today, as a way to contain or to prevent the revolution by the working class, specifically by the farmers in the UK, right? England realized that they want to bring in the city dwellers to make them the bourgeoisie against the farmers, right? To prevent a revolution by giving power to or illusion of power to the bourgeoisie, have them be busy with democracy, and have the farmers wish to be like the bourgeoisie rather than thinking about the landlords, or the aristocrats who actually run the show. This is what we're seeing today. Anytime there's a big dissent, the Democrats party send to us AOC or give us Bernie Sanders to make us believe in the system again, to make us believe that the system can actually make a change. But we are realizing now that this is all to fool us. This is on an internal level, but also an external level. To go back to the second part of your To your question,
Mm.
yeah, the rules of engagement. I think from Iran's perspective, I don't think Iran is scared or Iran doesn't have the capabilities. I think Iran is functioning as a state, a modern state that has its own institutions, has its own people that it's responsible for, has its own relationships, has a lot to lose. Iran is not like Hezbollah. It's not a state, right? It's not about just losing its leaders and its institutions, but also it's worried about the state itself, right? It's worried about feeding the people. It's worried about its long-term survival. Yes, many people, including you and myself and others, feel that if you don't escalate today, if you don't break the escalation dominance of Israel, eventually Israel and the U.S. will swallow you, and that's exactly what's happening. But I feel like Iran is allowing a backdoor for diplomacy. They want to go back to diplomacy. They want to go back to the negotiation table, but without being losers. They don't want to be defeated. They don't want to go there as defeated. They want to go there at least, if not as winners, at least as equal, equal partners in negotiations. They don't want to be losing because they realize at the end of the day they can't deal with the U.S. empire. They can't fight back against the empire without turning the whole region into a battlefield. And that potentially, if the leadership in Iran realizes that there's no survival, and I'm sure at this point they realize that the rules of engagement have changed since October 7. It's just a matter of what are the strategies and the policies that they need to change in order for them to survive. I think at this point the regime in Iran is thinking about survival and is not thinking about not winning. I think at this point is similar to the strategy of resistance in Gaza, which is not to be defeated, not to be annihilated. Because if we see, and this is exactly what's happening today, the attacks of Israel and the US, they can claim it's about nuclear power all they want. But we all know that Iran has, they're following a religious fatwa. They're part of the international discussions of not having nuclear weapons. They're fully committed to it, and if they wanted to build a nuclear weapon, they could have done it. As a matter of fact, the deal they made with Obama is more of a delaying process or a sabotage to them developing a nuclear weapon than the attack itself, right? We all know that. But clearly, the attacks today are not about the nuclear weapons. It's about regime change. The U.S. wants to, and again, we talked about this more in the podcast. The U.S. wants to stabilize the region, and by stabilize, I mean, according to America, stabilization according to America is destruction. So it can force its way and its policies in the region, so they can focus on China. Clearly, and we discussed this in details prior to today, the U.S. wants the region to be "quote unquote" stable. So, and the only way to do that is for Israel to be superior in the region and to have other allies that can help Israel to contain the region. And as long as there's an Iranian regime that supports the resistance and is not in alignment with the US in general in the region, the region will not be stabilized according to the US rules and policies. So, because of that, and because the US is thinking about the next 50 years of conflict, of war, of the rare elements that are needed for technology. And this is one of the reasons Trump wants to occupy Greenland and wants to make deals with Ukraine. They realize that AI is the future. They realize that technology is the future, and wars will be won by using AI. They need exclusive access to these rare elements. Whereas gas used to be the rare element in the past century, where everybody needed it for industrial needs, today what's needed is these rare elements that are needed for technology. So in order for them to compete with China, they need exclusive access to these elements, and they cannot have exclusive access to these elements without having the whole state focused on it. And if the region is not stable, then they don't have that capacity. So they need to bring about, topple the current regime in Iran, bring about a regime that is similar to the Shah. And it's not incidental and it's not random that the son of the Shah is now going around the world is trying to create an internal revolution in Iran. It's obvious what's happening. But unfortunately, we are falling again for the diplomacy of Biden and Blinken and Trump and Witkoff, which is we're working towards peace, we're working through diplomacy. But what's happening is that this is just a mechanism for distraction and deception. And I hope Iran and the resistance understand this, and they find different policies of trying to undermine this attack on toppling the regime.
I want to ask you what you think happens next.
It's hard to know, because it's not clear. I mean, we've seen that right after the attack, within the next maybe 12 hours, Iran hit Israel with massive missiles that caused a lot of damage. But beyond the damage it caused, but also showed the air defense system of Israel is degrading significantly, as everybody is witnessing today. So Iran has a choice or an option to continue to escalate against Israel and ignore the U.S., hoping by doing that they would not instigate the U.S. to retaliate and attack them. Um, I mean, they're more experienced and they know better than me and all of us. But I don't know if that's the best strategy, because I think, if anything, as we've been talking about today, the U.S. will get involved no matter what. Right, whether you instigate them or not, they will get involved to topple the regime. It's just about time. It's about the cost. And I want to mention that Trump, in true businessman fashion, was the smartest person in this deal. He got Israel to do the dirty work of the US for free. He didn't have to pay any price of the military. He didn't have to use his resources, with the exception of the attack on this weekend. But all of the degrading of Iranian resources, specifically when it comes to air defense systems, all of that was done by Israel. So think about it. Instead of using his own bases in the region, he used Israel. And of course, Israel is so excited and so zealous about doing this, because they've been talking about it since the 90s, right? They were fully committed to it. They were more than happy to do it. So Trump, on behalf of the American empire, was able to make a deal for Israel to do that work for them for free. Of course, by free, we don't mean by free, but you get what I mean. Um, so it's obvious at this point that Iran knows that the U.S. is behind this attack. They're not naive. They just don't want to go head to head or toe to toe against the U.S. at the time being. So what's happening, or what's going to happen next, all depends on how Iran decides to retaliate. But even with that, I don't think Iran can control what happens next, unless the U.S. and Israel realize that the regime change is going to cost them so much that maybe they will resort to just weakening it for the time being, like they've done in Gaza for the past 20 years, thinking that they can contain Hamas and contain the resistance in Gaza by enforcing the blockade, and every now and then they hit them with the war to drain their resources. But based on what we are witnessing in the past 2 years, I don't think that's an option anymore. I think the U.S. and Israel are going for complete annihilation, complete subjugation of the whole region. So it's up to Iran how they respond. I don't think Hezbollah is done. I think the leadership of Hezbollah was decapitated for sure, but it's obvious, following the news of the progression of the war between Israel and Hezbollah. I don't think their resources were degraded. I don't think their elite fighters are eliminated, as we've witnessed in the reporting that we got last year. I think Hezbollah is still very strong. I don't know at what point do they get involved, but it's obvious, if Israel and the U.S. continue their plan of regime change in Iran, that things will escalate significantly. Hezbollah most likely will get involved. Iranian supported militias in Iraq will also get involved. And we're not sure if Iran is going to hit American interests in the region directly. But we are witnessing today, there's a lot of reports by the U.S. asking its personnel in Qatar to shelter in place. And it looks like, I think just before I joined, Qatar has issued, I think, like a no aviation rule or policy today. I didn't read it well, but it looks like the Gulf is worried about a retaliation by Iran. So they might be coming. We don't know. But what we know today is Israel and the U.S. are determined to topple the regime. How much would that cost them? Are they ready for the cost? Is Iran is willing to go all out? I think we'll see in the next few days or weeks.
So I'll just end with this. I hate to play the armchair general as I sit in an armchair, but you pointed something out that was very interesting. You said that Trump got Israel to do the dirty work for them. That was obviously strategic. And there's another part of this that is strategic, I think. The fact that Saudi Arabia was, in the heat of these negotiations, obviously Saudi Arabia, I think, understood very well
Yes.
what the plans were. And the defense minister went to Iran to basically reassert their
Mhm.
position of intending to continue to seek peace with Iran.
Yeah,
And so that put Iran basically neutered their ability for deterrence
absolutely.
because if they can't attack the US bases because the US isn't directly attacking them, and if they can't attack the Gulf because and destroy their oil infrastructure because they're friends with them, then what can they do other than pelt
100%.
Israel with these rockets little by little, which is great. But I actually think that maybe Iran should try to take control of the situation they have to prove it's a game of chicken. They have to prove they're suicidal. Maybe that will then demonstrate to the US, okay, fine, they're threatening basically to tank the US economy and the global economy because of the energy prices. And okay, now we get the point, we'll cool off. But sitting in my armchair, I can't really
I
say more than that.
I think you provide a great point, which is, and it kind of also goes back hand in hand with my argument about that the U.S. has been planning this since the beginning of October 7, and the quick condemnation of the Israeli attack on Iran by Saudi. I think you're absolutely right, and the fact that the U.S. Flew the airplanes or their fight jets all the way from the U.S. directly to attack Iran to avoid using Gulf bases is actually proves your point as well, that they're trying to neutralize the target banks of Iran to minimize the retaliation of Iran. I think you're absolutely right, and it's not random because we know that Saudi doesn't function outside of the framework that is given to it by the U.S. I think this might be by design, them asking that part of the strategy to undermine Iran and topple the regime is to neutralize its enmity with the Gulf region, specifically with Saudi, to make it harder for them to tackle and attack American interests in the region. I think that goes hand in hand with what we're discussing today for sure.
Yeah, I think the fact that the U.S. is, emptying the embassies as well, the bases. I actually don't even think Iran should be attacking Israel right now, and I don't think they should be attacking a U.S. base.
I
I
think
think,
that's the easiest thing for them right now is
yeah,
to
I
do
think
that.
they should just be closing the Strait of Hormuz, and that's it. That's all you have. Your little Achilles heel is the oil, and that's it. That's my
I
opinion.
think Iran has more if they want to do real damage. They can do that. They can do more stuff in the region, specifically in Iraq and even in Syria. But we don't know to what extent. I think they will be more suicidal if things get really really uglier than where we are today. And we
Mhm.
don't know. Again, as I mentioned, it really goes back to the how much is the U.S. and Israel are determined to regime change, to commit to a regime change in Iran. All of the scenarios that you're discussing also really depend on that. And honestly, I truly believe, based on what we discussed today, and based on the policy change of containment and eliminate from containment to annihilation and elimination since October 7, I truly believe the U.S. and Israel are committed to that, no matter the cost. So now it all depends how Iran reads the situation and chooses to respond.
Okay, Rajat, thank you very much for being here with us today. And I'll also share on the screen Quds News Network and your personal account so my audience can follow. And if you would like a link to any of his profiles, go ahead and check out the description of this video. Rajat, I'd like to have you back on, inshallah. So perhaps in a week or two, as things escalate, we'll definitely have you back on. So thank you for spending your time with us and educating our audience.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Trust nothing. No